You are now listening to the Supply Chain Secrets Podcast with Brian Most and Don Davis.
Well, hi, everyone. I'm Brian Most, SVP of Retail Strategy at Nishex and former VP of Supply Chain at Walmart.
And I'm Don Davis. I'm the Senior Vice President of Carrier Strategy here at Nishex and former executive of Hapag-Lloyd and CMA CGM.
And we're back again with our podcast, Supply Chain Secrets. Today, Don and I have the pleasure of talking with a very special guest, Mr. Jesper Praestensgaard. Jesper is the managing partner of Humanostics, an organization that helps companies successfully align their business strategy with their people strategy. But many of you probably remember Jesper from his 30 plus years of senior executive experience from the shipping and logistics industry, including 25 years at AP Moller Maersk. Jesper, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Brian and Don.
And I know that was just a very brief introduction, Jesper, but I know you've had an absolutely amazing career in logistics and supply chain. It'd be great for our listeners, for those that don't know you, to just hear a bit more about that in your journey.
Yeah, I've been, as you said, more than 25 years, more than 30 years actually in the shipping and logistics business. I started with Maersk back in the mid-'80s and spent much of my career actually in Asia. I had the privilege for a couple of years of actually being personal assistant to our chairman at that time, Mr. Maersk McKinney-Moller, one of the legends in the industry. So that was quite an experience. Very, I learned a lot from that period. I have been both in liner shipping, but also in logistics. Left Maersk, joined Hapag-Lloyd, learned a lot in that process. Both in terms of similarities, but certainly also differences. I left Hapag back in 2013, and since then I have worked with Boston Consulting, have still today a number of non-executive board positions, and also have been active investing in different shipping startups typically. And then, not to forget, I hold the role of non-executive chairman of New York Shipping Exchange.
Well, thank you, and we're certainly happy to have you and your leadership and guidance. And based on kind of that broad history and background, obviously we have to start with just kind of what's happening in the logistics and ocean shipping industry today. I'd just be curious of your perspective. What do you see that is kind of the same, and what do you see that's changed, and where do you see kind of the industry going?
There is, of course, a lot of uniqueness around COVID-19. COVID-19 has instigated this whole turmoil that we're seeing right now. And so that's new. What's not new is that there are these things that will impact the supply chains internationally, and it creates havoc every time it happens. We saw what happened in the Suez Canal recently, but we've also seen problems before on the U.S. West Coast. We've seen constraints through the Panama Canal with insufficient water. So there's sort of a cycle of events that tends to throw things off. And that means that when people plan for predictability, plan for reliability, because at the end of the day, that is really what matters, both to carriers and to shippers, then they get caught out when we have things like this, because the system is not designed to deal with these sudden disruptions that we're seeing right now.
Yeah, it's been a challenging environment, but this has really led to these incredible results from the carriers. I mean, really results I don't think have ever been seen before. And one might look at that and say from a carrier perspective, this is great, this is all good, just judging by the results. But what are your thoughts on the results the carriers are seeing? And do you think that there's opportunities that might exist that they still might be able to take advantage of?
It is phenomenal results that the carriers are coming in with right now. I think it's important to look at it over the entire business cycle. And I don't have the numbers. I'm sure smart people have already worked out those numbers, or at least can work them out. But But my guess is that if you look over the business cycle, the carriers are now catching up somewhat on what they're behind. I mean, there's been in the container shipping industry over the years a massive destruction of value in the sense that the carriers have not been able to consistently earn cost of capital. Right now, they're in a situation where they do make up for that. Personally, I don't see any indications that fundamentally there is a change in supply and demand. And I think most people would echo that this year is a result of sudden disruptions that throws off the supply and demand situation. And the big question and the billion-dollar question really is, when are we going to see a return to normal situation? And with a normal situation, the typical situation over the last many decades has been a structural overcapacity and therefore a predictable behavior by both carriers and shippers.
And so, given this market situation and the results and everything that's happened, from your perspective and your point of view, what would be the short and long term strategy given what's happening today, if you're still at a carrier?
Well, fundamentally, I would say that the industry still needs to address the lack of incentives for delivering reliable service. And that is not just from the carrier side, it's also from the shipper side. Because if I look back, I was expatriated to Hong Kong in the early 90s. We went into the port of Yantian in those days. And I remember after we've gotten in there, I traveled to the US, met up with a lot of shippers trying to convince them to ship FOB Yantian rather than FOB Hong Kong, which was sort of, that's not possible. But today, of course it is. Now, in those days, one of the big issues was overbookings. And we did all sorts of things in terms of how could we address that, because it was costly. And when you have overbookings, not only do you have ships leaving empty, but you also have the occasional situations where carriers overbook and then the cargo turns up and now we got rollings. So we had long discussions 30 plus years ago about how do we address that with shortfall fees and all sorts of names for that should sort of instill some sort of reliability. Here, 30 years later, we're still struggling with that. It's of course, it's amplified by COVID-19 and all that, and there's nothing in the world right now that would address the lack of reliability, because the build up in the supply chain simply takes time to sort of eradicate that. But the lack of reliability is still there, and it will still be there once we normalize, unless the industry, and by that I mean both carriers and shippers, begin to look at how do we incentivize both sides to actually deliver on commitments. And I remember 20 years ago, we met up with airlines, British Airways and all sorts of airlines who were famed for their allocation process. And we said, why can't we do that in container shipping? We were amazed by their ability to do S-curve pricing. We were amazed by their ability to do, sell on the same flight, different price points and different service levels. And of course, it's a little hard to sell a container on business class versus economy class. But the fact that you could sell the same seat almost, but at least on the same flight at different price points. And not only that, if the passenger didn't turn up, the airline wasn't their problem. And what that meant for reliability and utilization of the assets. We talked about that 20 years ago, and we are still in a situation where this industry hasn't solved that. We haven't moved to the point that the airlines moved to years back. And the airlines have their other issues. They are fiercely competitive for other issues and all that. But that particular part about allocation capacity management, which is the foundation for a reliable service, haven't solved that yet. And that will still haunt us once things get back to normal after the COVID-19 turmoil right now.
Jesper, hearing you talk about, back to, the shift from Hong Kong into Yantian and other things. And I remember, working with you and the MERS team in those early days when I was at Walmart. And like you said, some of those seem like monumental shifts. And it's obviously, normal course of business today. And you talk about, again, shippers and carriers, trying to work to solve some of these challenges, because even when we do get to whatever is normal, there still will be these instances and events that we have to try and overcome together. And, obviously when I was at Walmart for a number of those years, we tried to facilitate and collaborate with our business partners in a way that was transparent and really tried to work longer term. And but now we're in a position where it's more than just one shipper and one carrier. Even if it's an influential shipper, it's a much broader industry type of solution. And one of the things Don and I try to do is give, maybe practical advice or things that people could think about or actually start to plan for. And, when you think about just that shipper carrier relationship, what are some of the things you think about? Obviously, you've talked about, the commitment side of it, but are there other things that shippers in particular need to be thinking about when they work with their ocean carrier partners that they should be focused on and starting to build into their programs to help their carriers support them better?
There's lots of things, but again, if you look at the industry, then that industry will be driven by economic incentives. So economic incentives to do the right thing. So if you look at the industry today, on the shipper side, on the carrier sides, people get in the office every morning or sit at home and work from their home office, and they try and do the right thing. They try and accommodate the bookings that are coming in. The shippers are trying to make sure that the bookings that they have made, that they actually materialize and so on. So no one, I believe, or very few at least, does this out of ill will. But we've just set ourselves up for not rewarding that type of reliability. So if you, to your point, Bryan, about what can we do? Before I get to that, maybe we can talk about some of the motives. If you go back in time and you look at container shipping, when container shipping was a lot smaller, we could get things fixed through a simple phone call. That meant that if a Walmart container got rolled, or if we knew that there was sort of a cut and run situation on a ship, we could make a few phone calls and we could prioritize, and it was possible. Now, many years later, we have a massively large industry with huge ships that comes in, where containers are already stacked prior to the ships arriving in port. And it's all laid out as sort of a finely tuned machine. That also means that you can't just make a phone call and sort of give that person, that client priority over the others. That's simply not possible. So you've got to set yourself up from the outset in terms of operational systems, in terms of booking systems, in terms of contracts that can be relied upon, right? And again, it's not because today's contract that people out of an ill will do not try and honor them, but we have set ourselves up for that to happen inevitably when you have particularly the turmoil right now. So I don't know if there's any sort of quick tip that I can give to a shipper, because the obvious one is that right now the carriers are raking it in. They are taking advantage of getting the rates up, and as I said, they're probably just making up for all the money they've lost in the past, or somewhat. We also know that when it's the shipper's turn and the capacity situation is in their favor, they will go in, typically at least, and haggle for the last $25. And of course, if you ship hundreds of thousands of containers a year, it's a lot of money. And if you are rewarded as a logistics manager for sort of getting that $25 per container lower, you would of course go in and try and deliver that. And again, I don't think it's ill will. I think it's an example of where we've set ourselves up for failure almost, right? So when I look ahead, what I hope will happen when we get to the end of the current COVID-19 turmoil, that is that carriers and shippers unite around common standards that the airlines did many years ago in terms of predictability and all that. And we have common standards in the industry that allows us to count on things, commitments being mutual. Because what I also think is interesting is that when we get to that point, I also believe you will begin to compete on the old virtues. Right? Once you've eliminated all the hoo-ha and panic, you get back to, how easy are you to do business with? You get back to relationship, who do I like to do business with? And some of the old virtues that we had back when the world was different. And I hope we could get to that point again, because I think that competition is a lot more fun and a lot more healthy.
So Jesper, let's just dive into that a little bit deeper, right, around the NYSHEX component. So can you just talk to the listeners about your current role? I think you've been involved from almost the beginning. Can you just talk about your role and how you've seen the exchange evolve over the past 5 to 6 years?
Yeah, I've been involved for 5 years plus in NYSHEX, and have been really excited about the concept from day one. And I think the value proposition, to my mind, is still incredibly strong. It's incredibly strong because it's not one or the other in this industry. It's actually a value proposition that goes in and addresses both carriers and shippers. And you got a lot of new initiatives out there that has a focus on either or. So very strong point that NYSHEX go in and addresses both the carriers and the shippers. I was excited from the get-go. The first time I talked to Gordon Downs and he sort of presented the concept, also because it was building on elements that we, back in the earlier days in Maersk, had also worked with U-Ship and so on, which was actually something we acquired from P&O back in the days. So the whole thought of committing to paying ocean freight at the time of booking as opposed to time of departure, that has wide implications in terms of building in that reliability in supply chains and the commitments between the parties. We kicked it off, and I was actually convinced that this year was such a compelling proposition that it would sell like hotcakes, and we would go through the roof within 6 months. It took a little longer, and it just goes to show that we are dealing with an industry, both carriers and shippers again, that are very conservative. It takes a long time to change established ways of doing business. You're up against a lot of basic stuff, where you go in and say, we could also do it this way. And then people say, you mean to say that what I've done the last 20 years has been wrong? No, that was not really what I said. I think we could actually do it even better going forward, right? So we're up against a lot of these kind of dialogues. We are also up against the issue of, do we need industry standards that of course has to be in full compliance with antitrust and all that, because we want to make sure that there's absolutely no gray zones there or anything, but industry standards that everybody comply to? Or is this here still a competitive part where each carrier, each shipper thinks that they can outsmart the rest of the industry and go for their own solution, which, when you look at it, could potentially do the same as NYSHEX, but would have that proprietary thing as opposed to being that neutral third-party exchange that would actually regulate how mutual commitments in this industry was going to be handled. So what I've seen is that it's taking a long time, but I've also over the last 12 months, actually preceding COVID-19 as well, seen that things are picking up. And I've been, it's been a lot more fun the last 12 months than it was the 12 months prior to that, where we were, growing, but from a very low level, and we still had to raise money and all that, till now, where we are actually seeing good growth, and it's year on year on year growth that we have now seen. So we're beginning to get to a point where, this is really exciting. I'm not saying that we shouldn't grow more, but I'm saying that we are at an inflection point, I believe, where this hopefully will soon, grow exponentially.
Yeah,
But I'm going to ask you two gentlemen about that in a second here, because I can't wait to hear what you have to say about that from your shipper and carrier perspective as well.
Yeah, I was just going to say it's an unfortunate situation that everyone's having to go through, of course, with COVID, and then obviously the recovery from it. But maybe this bright spot is that people's minds are finally open to this change or a new way of doing business or alternatives that hadn't been thought of before. When you think about other businesses and industries and how they've adapted and how it's added conveniences and better ways of working for customers and serving customers and internal working and work-life balance, and you can go through all of the things that have come through it. And my hope is for our industry that people's minds are finally open. And I think you're right, Jesper, when you look at adoption of, digital ways of incorporating into your business and the importance of visibility and longer term planning. And, those are all things that people are talking about now or testing and learning or piloting. And I'm not sure that would have been the case if some of these things hadn't happened. And the one thing I love about NICEX is what we're actually talking about here is a solution to the problem, right? I mean, I've seen on social media, LinkedIn, other things, people are actually commenting and saying, I'm tired of seeing all the articles of the problems and restating the problems and just, each headline being more sensational than the other, but none of them talk about the solution or what people could be doing to move forward. And one of the things I love that you've outlined, and that, of course, is the premise of NICEX, is it's a collaborative way and a neutral way to move forward. And it's a solution to these problems. And that's kind of what excites me.
Yeah. That's good. And from what I understand, Bryan, and maybe you'll add a few words to that, the shipper side is really picking up also after you joined. And I thought that was really rewarding that we get the demand side leaning in even more than we saw in the past.
Well, what I will tell you is there certainly is still a group out there that would love to still haggle for $25, but I will tell you the majority of the industry and the majority of the shippers that I'm working with are much more focused on more of an end-to-end type of solution, and again delivering value and a competitive advantage on behalf of their company. And really trying to find a way to build resilience. It's not anymore about, can I save $5 or $10 here or there? It's can I deliver a solution that sets my company apart? And that's what's been exciting is people seeing, that aspect of this business. And then the other part is that I think a lot of shippers, even like ourselves, we would have loved to have these committed types of agreements that are based on this very specific performance framework, but the administrative process of managing it and trying to follow exceptions and things without a technology solution is very administrative intensive. And a lot of shippers just don't have the headcount or the overhead to support that. So to work with a group and to be able to provide the technology support that does that lifting, and takes away that administrative need, it has really helped a lot of shippers move to that phase of saying, okay, this is very low risk. The barriers of entry are low, and it's certainly I can find a place to do either a test or pilot or apply this to my business. It's been really exciting.
That's good to hear, Bryan. And fortunately, we see it in the numbers as well. And I think that's the most rewarding when people, they sort of walk the talk. So good to hear.
Jesper, are there any questions that you want to ask us? I mean, obviously, Bryan and I are working at NICEX full time. We're exposed to a lot of things every day. And from your perspective, is there anything that you'd like to hear from us? I think it might be interesting for our listeners too to have our perspective. But are there questions that you'd like to ask us?
I mean, one big question which I keep raising is the value proposition of NICE in my view, and I admit it, I'm biased, but in my view, it's such a compelling value proposition that I simply can't get my head around why people don't just lean in. But I don't know if you could sort of maybe talk to some of the concerns that people have and say why they why don't they just lean in and say that this could help them.
Well, if I could take that question from a carrier perspective, and my sense is that there are carriers that absolutely want to have two-way commitments. I think we've seen that publicly, that carriers have done it. I think there is some learning that carriers go through as they start on this journey of the stakeholders that need to be involved. So I think there's some learning, but I think there's greater adoption. So I think it just takes time. I think there's other carriers who are still learning and thinking about how they could do it. But to some extent, there's a limitation for some carriers because it's just such a difficult situation. And they feel like, well, it's like I'm selling fire insurance when your house is on fire. It's very difficult in this environment for me to commit because I have all these issues and I need more stability. So the good news is my sense is that people are excited about it, and that I don't have the impression that anyone that has a NICE contract from a carrier side has any regret or feels bad about it. They see that this is good. So there's momentum to build on that. And I think that helps give shippers confidence too, that they've had a good experience. But I think Bryan can speak from a shipper side.
Yeah, what I would tell you, Jesper, is for the last 10 to 20 years, to your point, shippers have had this benefit of a market with overcapacity and carriers going after market share and essentially, right, tripping over themselves to offer rate reductions, even when shippers sometimes don't even ask for it, right? Yeah. And so now something has completely changed, right? You've got this structural shift in this marketplace. And now shippers are starting to figure out, hey, I've got to act and do things differently if I'm going to be successful in kind of this new normal and whatever it is. And so to think now that they actually have to make commitments themselves. In other words, yes, I'm going to tell you that I'm going to do something and then I'm actually going to come through. Otherwise, I could be held accountable. And so that's a mindset that shippers need to kind of, overcome. Yeah. Because they haven't been held accountable, for some of these bad practices and some of these things that have happened in the past. But here's the great thing, right? I mean, there is a process and a set of solutions that can be put in place that allow shippers to kind of start from this process of creating, reasonable and predictive forecasts, creating kind of this interaction with their carrier that's more collaborative and transparent around agreeing on, what port pairs and what business makes sense to do together through the tender process, and then landing on kind of these committed agreements that truly benefit both sides, where the shipper is having a much lower risk of default because they are using these committed contracts in places where it's important to them. They're priority lanes. They have critical mass. It moves regular business. And of course, it aligns with the carrier's network. And, there is, this low risk from a shipper perspective when you do the homework and you put in the time and effort, and there's this high reward. So you kind of get over this fear of default when you see this return of predictability and reliability that comes from these committed agreements. And so one of the things that's been exciting that we've been doing here at NICE is helping shippers move through that journey and helping provide some of the tools and solutions that give them confidence to overcome the fear of a default, and really the confidence to commit to see that resilience come into their supply chain.
Yeah,
that's good. If I could add to that, I do think the industry's changing and people are starting to realize that. I think that started in 2019 when carriers started to blank sail, and I don't think you ever saw so many blank sailings happen. But there was a need to blank sail at the time because ships weren't full, the capacity wasn't being utilized. And as we go forward in this new environment, there's fewer carriers. I think there's a sense that the industry is changing, and I think that's helping adoption of NYSHEX, because that awareness of the way things used to be 10 years ago, that there used to be these proactive rates reductions. It used to be this sort of race to the bottom and who's going to go to the lowest. I think those days are gone. And I don't think that carriers need to behave that way. I don't see them thinking that way. So I think in this new environment, it starts to change, and it takes some people longer than others, but you can see that there's a recognition that, hey, this isn't the same market that it was 10 years ago. What can I do? And that's where there's tremendous value about saying like, hey, I want to commit. If you can commit, let's create a framework, instead of saying my MQC is 10,000 TEUs, but no one knows what that means in terms of a week-to-week basis.
That's right. Yeah. That's good to hear.
Yeah, it's certainly exciting. So are there any other questions that you'd like to ask us? We'll let you turn it around and play podcaster and ask questions.
The question is to you both, actually, whether this is going to happen next Monday or the Monday after.
Well, I think Brian's probably going to deliver.
We'll let Don answer that one. We'll let him be on the hook for that one.
I have tremendous faith in Brian. I think it'll be next week.
I tell you what, Jesper, we're so excited. I mean, the opportunities that continue to come, it's just super exciting, and I can promise you'll absolutely continue to see progress out of Don and I.
Yeah, no, I know.
And one thing I'd just like to add too is that I think Bryan and I can attest. It's a lot of fun being here, and I can say before I started, I'd been asked a number of times, like, are you ready to work at a startup? Are you ready to work at a startup? And I always thought, like, I don't know what happens at a startup. But I understand now that there's a tremendous amount of speed and agility. There's things happening quickly. There's a pressure to perform. But it has been a terrific experience from my side. And I think I can speak for both of us that I could say it's been a lot of fun, and we're excited to be here. It's great.
And I do have to say, Jesper, we're certainly grateful again for your leadership and guidance. The framework that you and Gordon and the rest of the board have put together that has allowed us to go out and just acquire amazing talent and put this diverse team together that is really kind of clicking on all cylinders is really the key to this. And so again, thank you for the guidance and the vision and allowing us to go out and really do our thing. It's been fun.
That's good to hear. That's good to hear.
Well, all right. I think at this point, this is kind of a wrap for the show. So, Jesper, I'd like to thank you for coming on. I think it was a great show. It was a fun conversation. And I hope we can do this again sometime in the not too distant future.
I'll be happy to. And I can't wait to do this again with the two of you. And we're looking at how we've grown exponentially from now till the next show.
We're going to try our best. So for our listeners, thanks a lot. Don't forget to hit the like button wherever you find our podcast, Spotify, Apple, or wherever your podcasts are found. Thanks again for listening.
Thanks for listening to the Supply Chain Secrets Podcast. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast network.